Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here and for inviting me to be here with you, for your commitment to the pursuit of human rights and justice locally and globally, and to doing this on this beautiful Sydney sunny Saturday morning, afternoon. To understand where we are today, and especially in regards to Palestine, Israel, I think we really have to take a few steps back, find out how we got here, what are the major issues that drive the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, in order to find out how we can move forward. To begin with, a little bit of history. When the early Zionist movement set out to establish a Jewish state in historic Palestine, they knew that they had to deal with two major challenges. They had to establish a Jewish majority on land that was already populated by an existing, vibrant, non-Jewish population. And they knew they had to, once they've established this majority, they had to actually maintain this majority in the long run forever. And so they set out to increase the number of Jews by way of encouraging Jewish immigration. And this brought up the number of the Jewish population in historic Palestine from only 7% at the turn of the century to 33% in 1946. That's just 1 year before the United Nations recommended the partition of Palestine. And 33% was still hardly a majority or enough to establish a state for the Jewish people in Palestine. And so the Zionist founders of the State of Israel deliberately and systematically set out to, and I don't know how to use this thing, there. They set out to pave the way for the establishment of a Jewish state by trying to decrease the number of the Palestinians as much as possible. And they did that by way of ethnic cleansing, expulsion, and terror assaults on the Palestinian villages. By the end of it, 425 Palestinian villages, including Deir Yassin, and you see a picture of it here, were ethnically cleansed in order to pave way for Israel to be established. And well over 700,000 Palestinians, that's 80% of the Palestinian population at the time, became refugees and were exiled, and they were forced off their land, never to be allowed the right to return until this day. Some of them ended up in what we call today the West Bank and Gaza. Others ended up in neighboring countries, and we can talk about that later. An armistice line at the end of the 1948 war was established, and it became internationally recognized as Israel's official borders. Now, until this day, Israel has not yet declared what its borders are, but when we talk about 1948 Israel, we're often referring to the state that was established in 1948 and was declared to be the state of Israel and was recognized by the rest of the world community. Now, they did, within those borders, because of the expulsion of the Palestinian population, they were able to establish a Jewish majority. But then 1967 came, and in the math of the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel had occupied the rest of historic Palestine, which includes the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and that's the areas in the yellow, I think, on this map right here, and parts of Sinai at the time, which they had given back. And so what happened in 1967 is the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution, that was Resolution 242, calling on Israel to withdraw its armed forces and citing the inadmissibility of the acquisition of land by war. Resolution 242 became the basis until this day for United Nations policy making on the Middle East when it comes to Israel-Palestine, because it drew some clear lines in the sand. It defined what it viewed as the international community to be illegally occupied territories by Israel, and this is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem, and what it viewed to be Israel's officially recognized borders, which were the 1949 armistice line. The line between the two, the line that you see around the yellow areas, this is what we refer to when we speak about Palestine, Israel, as the green line. That's the line between the occupied territories and the rest of the land of Israel. And so what happened is, this was a very significant year for Israel, 1967. And it was significant because Israel found itself standing at a crossroad. It could have, at the time, withdrawn from the occupied territories. And by doing so, it would have paved the way for the creation of a Palestinian state that's fully and economically independent, and where the Palestinians could live. And it would have had an Israeli state, much like the stuff that we talk about today when we talk about the two-state solution. That option was on the table in '67. The other choice for Israel was to integrate the Palestinian population that were now under its control because it acquired these territories, and give them Israeli citizenship, full citizenship rights, and just annex the territories and maintain control of the land and give the people rights and move on with it, which is what we call today the one-state solution. But Israel was not interested in either of these two options at the time. It still is not interested in this option today. What Israel has wanted and has continued to pursue since 1967 is a third option, which is keeping the land and the resources without taking any responsibility for the people that come with this land. And in fact, by trying constantly to decrease the population of these people that are on this land and still pursue its policy of increasing the population of the Jewish people on this land. And so this is where we end up today. You can actually see here how the population changes along throughout the years. And then we come to this. This is the most recent statistic, and this is really interesting. This is the current demographic breakdown for all of the land that is under Israel's control today. That's Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. Now, according to this recent survey, which was released earlier this year by the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, if current growth rates remain the same between the two populations, it's quite possible by 2016, that's just next year, for the number of Palestinians and Jews living in Israel and in the occupied territories to total about 6.42 million each. So there will be an equal number of Jews and non-Jews living in all the areas that Israel controls today. Now, this is quite significant. There's another very significant statistic that comes out of this. The number of Palestinians in historic Palestine is expected to actually increase above that of the Jews by 2020. There will be 7.14 million Palestinians compared to 6.87 million Jews by 2020. So now almost half of the population that lives under Israel's control today, inside Israel's 1948 borders, in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, in East Jerusalem, are actually Palestinian and not Jews. And yet Israel defines itself as a state for its Jewish citizens. Now keep this in mind as you consider that Israel's priority today remains the same as it was in 1947, in the lead up to the establishment of the Jewish state. And this priority is ensuring a Jewish majority. And so they refer to the Palestinian population growth constantly as a demographic threat and a demographic time bomb. Now, so how do they propose to continue with this situation? Now, we've heard a lot of politicians in recent weeks, especially Moshe Aylon said that in Israeli army radio. Netanyahu refers to it all the time. Israeli politicians are talking about political, some kind of a model where we have, where we're politically separated from Israel, which is code word for not having political rights within the very state that actually dictates every aspect of our lives as Palestinians. And at the same time, they talk about managing the conflict. So it's all about conflict management and separating the Palestinians and segregating the Palestinians. There are so many fancy words for this, but we're going to cut through all of these fancy words, and we're going to call it apartheid, because that's really how Israel proposes to continue to do what it's doing without endangering the delicate establishment of the Jewish majority that they were able to get to. You can see here, I was in a bit of a rush when I put this together. These are just a few quotes and examples of how the word apartheid has become consistently used to describe Israel's current system of governance in Israel-Palestine. So it's become quite mainstream to talk about Israel's system of managing the Palestinians as an apartheid system. Now, the term apartheid is borrowed from the African word for apartness, which describes the system of racial segregation and discrimination that was implemented in South Africa by white minority government from 1948 to 1949. Israel and South Africa don't have to be the same for this definition of apartheid to apply to Israel. A lot of people pull their hairs out trying to make sure that they exactly match. They don't have to match. What matters is, does Israel fit into the definition of the crime of apartheid as defined by the United Nations and by the Rome Statute? And the answer to this is yes, it does. So let's look at how this apartheid system actually looks like in practice in Israel and Palestine. Here's something a lot of you may not know. No matter where you're born in historic Palestine, if you're born in Tel Aviv, or if you're born in East Jerusalem, or if you're born in the West Bank, or if you're born in the Gaza Strip, it doesn't matter. No matter where you're born, your birth registration and your ID, which defines what rights you're entitled to, are issued by the Israeli government in Israel. These cards determine where you're allowed to live, what rights you're entitled to have, which areas you're allowed to live in, and which areas you're allowed to move within, and a lot more than that. Now, those who are born Jewish are placed instantly on top of this system, as you can see. They face no systematic discrimination by the government. They are given many privileges that the non-Jews who live in Israel and in the occupied territories don't have. They have the right to vote. They can live anywhere in Israel that they choose, or even live in Palestinian areas on Jewish settlements in the West Bank, protected by the Israeli army. They enjoy many privileges, including the right to family reunification, the right to marry outside of Israel, and to bring their spouses to live with them. Anyone in this room who is of Jewish descent or anywhere in the world can actually live in Israel, become an Israeli citizen, and immediately is placed up there on the top tier of this ID system. People like me, I'm a Palestinian from Gaza. I couldn't even dream of being up there. I would have to, if I'm lucky, I will be able to go into Gaza. But I haven't been able to do that for a few years. And so this is what it looks like at the top. If you go one level down, the second level is for the 1.3 million Palestinians who are citizens of Israel. They are not Jewish by birth, but they carry Israeli citizenship. They are seen by the Israeli government as the ones who constitute the biggest threat to Israel's Jewish character because they hold Israeli citizenship and because they're not Jewish. They constitute roughly 20% of Israel's population. They face systematic discrimination and are in fact treated as second-class citizens with more than 20 basic laws discriminating against them in order to contain them and to reduce their numbers. These policies are in place to ensure that their numbers don't grow as a population. They have no right, for example, to family reunification or to bringing in a spouse from overseas or from outside of Israel. Going down one more level, you're looking at Palestinians who hold Jerusalem IDs. They've been on the news a lot lately with all the violence eruptions that have taken place in Israel-Palestine. So these Palestinians who hold a Jerusalem ID, they are not Israeli citizens. They have a special ID. They have no right to vote within the political system which governs every aspect of their lives. They live in the eastern part of Jerusalem on the Palestinian side of the 1967 Green Line, within the areas that is supposed to be the future Palestine state, and in fact in the area, East Jerusalem is supposed to be the future Palestine capital. But it is under full Israeli control. This area was annexed by Israel in breach of international law, which prohibits unilateral annexation. For this reason, the international community does not recognize Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem. Residents in East Jerusalem face systematic land expropriation. They are often denied building permits, so they're not allowed to have a natural population growth in the area. If they build without a permit, their homes face demolition orders and can be demolished. Since 1967, 2,000 Palestinian homes have been demolished in East Jerusalem alone, which is a very small area of land. This is a very striking high number when you look at the number of families that it affects in that area. Also, Israel revokes residency and social benefits for Palestinians who stay abroad for less than 7 years. So it looks for excuses to take away their permit from them, therefore not allowing them to come back and to live in their ancestral home in East Jerusalem. Some of these families' roots in East Jerusalem go back hundreds, if not thousands of years. 1,400 Palestinian residency permits have been revoked over the years. And there's been speaking and talking lately by the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's been threatening to further revoke 80,000 more permits of Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem. So they're actually at the front line of Israel's firing line right now. Residents of East Jerusalem are denied the right to bring in a spouse from outside. So if they want to get married, they have to leave. If they want to study for longer than the period they're allowed to be outside, they have to leave, and so on. And so they face a lot of, as you can see, difficulties and hardships. All these policies that they face they're there to aim at decreasing the Palestinian presence in the city, while of course there are other policies that are implemented to increase the Jewish presence. This is referred to as the Judaization of Jerusalem. 35% of land, and you can see it on this map here, 35% of the land in East Jerusalem has been confiscated for Israeli settlement. This is 35% of the land of Arab East Jerusalem. That's supposed to be the capital of Palestine. And this number is from an old statistic. I don't know this year, the number is probably going to be higher than 35%. Now, going down one more level on our levels of separate political systems for Palestinians is the West Bank ID. There are 2.3 million Palestinians living in the West Bank. They hold an Israeli-issued West Bank ID. Almost half of the population in the West Bank are Palestinian refugees who were forced out of their homes or fled in 1948 from what is now Israel. And until this day, they are denied the right to return to their homes behind the Green Line. Palestinians in the West Bank are stateless, so they've lived in limbo without having citizenship for a very long time, since Israel has been established. They are barred from living on 40% of their own land in the West Bank. This is land that's been confiscated by Israel for settlements, for Jewish-only settlements. And they are barred from living anywhere outside of the West Bank in historic Palestine. So if you have a West Bank ID, you cannot go and live in the Gaza Strip, not that you would want to. And you cannot go and live in East Jerusalem. You have to be confined to living in that area. A recent map here produced by the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem gives a very poignant picture of the extensive Israeli settlement growth within the occupied territories and the lack of contiguity, space, and resources that are afforded to the Palestinian population. You can see how disconnected and how fragmented the Palestinian areas are, and the impossibility of imagining a Palestinian state. When they talk about a Palestinian state for the Palestinians, and you look at this map, it just seems impossible. All shades of blue and the light beige areas are controlled by Israel, with the dark blue on the map signifying the areas where the settlements exist. Palestinians are confined to the dark brown areas, ghettoized in 12% of their original territory, in what many have likened to South Africa's Bantustans. The West Bank is divided up into 70 isolated cantons with no physical movement allowed between them without Israeli permission. There are over 500 military checkpoints where Palestinians often wait for hours, and they must have their West Bank ID cards in order to pass through, if they're allowed to pass through. And that's just to travel short distance, to go to school, or to go to work, or to visit a friend, or to visit your parents, whatever. Whereas Israeli settlers can travel easily on Israeli-only roads with the protection of the Israeli army. There's a quote here by Carol Boger, Deputy Executive Director for External Relations, Human Rights Watch. She says, while Israeli settlements flourish, Palestinians under Israeli control live in a time warp. They're not just separate, not just unequal, but sometimes even pushed off their land and out of their homes. Next down on this list of IDs are those that belong to the residents of the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is a narrow strip of Palestinian territory along the Mediterranean. If there is to be a Palestinian state, Gaza would have been the only seaport and the only unhindered access that Palestine could have to the outside world. So that is the significance of the Gaza Strip that sometimes escapes people. The Strip is only 25 miles long and 6 miles wide and is known to be one of the most densely populated places on Earth. There are 1.7 million people living in Gaza and holding the Gaza ID card. Every day a child born in Gaza, they have to wait for their Israeli-issued ID card to be in their hands. People kind of don't think about these things because they think of Gaza as have drifted away from Israel's control, whereas it's really still firmly under Israeli control. 3/4 of this population are refugees who were expelled from their houses and their land in what became Israel in 1948. More than half of the population of Gaza are under the age of 18. Most don't have access to clean water. 44% are under the poverty line. Unemployment rate has reached over 50%, meaning every other adult in Gaza is now unemployed. And these are direct result of the siege that Israel has implemented on Gaza for many years now. Israel withdrew its settlement population from Gaza in 2005, but it continues to control Gaza until this day. By controlling all the crossings in and out of Gaza, it controls the ground through incursions and sporadic ground troops presence, especially in its ever-growing no-go zone. It controls the Gaza airspace, the Gaza territorial waters. It controls the Palestinians' tax policy and transfer of tax revenues to and from Gaza. It was kind of shocking the last time I was in Gaza. It just dawned on me that every time I bought something in Gaza, I was using the Israeli shekel, so it's the Israeli currency that is being used in Gaza. So it's pretty much is a Bantustan that Israel runs and controls entirely. Palestinians with Gaza IDs are at the bottom tier of the Israeli-issued IT system. They have no right to vote, nor representation within the Israeli political system, which controls their lives. They are barred from living anywhere outside of Gaza, not even in the Palestinian-controlled areas of the West Bank. So you can see the political separation of Gaza and the West Bank. Their movements are severely restricted by the siege. They're in essence imprisoned within the Strip, even during times of war when their cities and towns are being heavily bombed. The population of the people of Gaza are trapped with no option to leave for safer grounds. Since 2008, the people of Gaza were subjected to 3 large-scale wars. The last one lasted more than 51 days last year, in which Israel indiscriminately dropped 20,000 tons of explosives on that tiny strip of land. By the end of it, almost 2/3 of the Gaza Strip had been bombed. That's the area in yellow on this map to the one that says 2014. You can see just how extensive the bombing has been. So all the area in the yellow is where the bombs were dropped, and all the area in the orange is where severe damage has happened. Not only did Israel bomb basic civilian infrastructure like the water treatment plant, the electricity plant, schools and clinics. What was especially different about Israel's bombing this time was that it deliberately targeted homes. People were called by the IDF and were told to leave their homes, and minutes after the call came through, if they were lucky enough to actually answer the call, their homes were turned to rubble. This was a special feature of the last war, making as many of Gaza's people and residents homeless as possible. If you look at the map, you will just see just the extensive damage. I mean, I can't stop staring at this map just to imagine. I have family in a lot of these areas here, and when the bombing was taking place, it didn't matter who I called, which area they lived in, if it was in Rimal, if it was in Zatoun, if it was in Tufah, you know, they were telling me the same thing. The houses around them were falling. And the message from Israel to the people of Gaza was quite clear. The message was, you cannot live here. That was the message. So what do we do? I've presented you with what the issues are. Now, during the Palestinian, during the past 67 years, several dozen UN resolutions were directed at Israel over core issues such as refugees, Jerusalem, and borders, as well as its unlawful attacks on its neighbors and its violations of the human rights of the Palestinians, including deportations, demolitions of homes, settlement expansion, confiscation of Palestinian land, and so on. But all of these resolutions went unimplemented. Instead, the Palestinians, an occupied people, were for 20 years made to negotiate with their occupying power over rights to which they were already entitled to under international law. They had to negotiate for their basic human rights with their occupiers. And we know where that took us to. It really led to nothing more than us wasting 20 years of negotiations while Israel entrenched its occupation and its control of the Palestinian people. Now, Palestinians today understand that freedom and rights are never going to be offered on a silver platter or given to us in the halls of power, and that we need to earn these rights through mass popular movements and through organized civil rights struggle. And it is for this reason that more Palestinians are embracing civil society's call for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions globally. And we can talk about this later in the question time, and I think Jake might also cover a little bit on the BDS movement. And this is a model that is based on the South African struggle to end apartheid. So we see a lot of, we're learning a lot from previous civil rights struggle, and we're seeing the Palestinian struggle today as a civil rights struggle, and we're walking in their footsteps. I wanted to flag something before I end, and I will end with a poem. But I wanted to flag something for you that might be of interest. I've been told that the New South Wales Greens for Palestine working group have launched a campaign to end all military ties with Israel. And you can find out more about this at www.endmilitarytieswithisrael.com. So if anybody is interested to learn more about this campaign, or if anybody in this room knows a little bit more about this campaign, it would be great to talk to us about it. And on ending military ties with Israel, I'm just going to end with a poem, if that's okay?
Yeah.
All right. This is called Surgical Precision. See, sometimes when words fail, I go to poetry, and I wrote this one for Elbit Systems. It's an Israeli arms industry which does a lot of business here in Australia. And Elbit specializes in drones and surveillance equipment technology. So I thought it was befitting for us when we're talking about global to local to speak about this company. Elbit Systems is the jewel to the crown of Israel's arms industry. We, the Palestinians, we know them intimately. Their technologies have been developed inside of our flesh, in our psyche, and in the air that we breathe in our besieged territories. In that place, over there, beyond the holy hills where the earth is desecrated by the footprints of war criminals, colonized on the body parts of little children, and declared a light upon the nations to the zealous politicians who believe that they're on a sacred mission to fulfill a prophecy, so they march us on to Armageddon with clear vision and surgical precision. The crowd roars and marvels at the latest technology. Young Jewish kids, they lug their big lounge chairs and fight over the best spot on top of the hill under the night sky overlooking the killing fields of the Gaza Strip, and they cheer and they cheer and they cheer every time the sky lights up before it gives birth to another bomb. Death pours like rain, a standing ovation. Over at CNN, a well-padded reporter in Sedrot stares at a small crater on the ground. He seems amused. This is where the Qassam rocket fell last night. As you can see, Palestinians use primitive technologies. The reporter then explains, almost with reverence, how Israel's F-16s are guided by UAVs, that's short for unmanned aerial vehicles, drones that can deliver well-defined images of the people below in real time. The reporter looks into the camera and pauses for dramatic emphasis. On ABC Radio 744, Peter Leonard, the spokesperson for the Israeli army, has the floor. He educates Australians on Israel's superiority and their meticulous methods of warfare draped in morality and characterized by, you guessed it, surgical precision. The Wall Street Journal adds cheers of its own with a lengthy feature story describing the IDF's glory. Drones show their worth in the Gaza war, reads the headline. On Fox News, an Israeli pilot tells the anchor in the Situation Room, drones save human lives while ensuring the terrorists' demise. P.S. The pilot's face was actually blurred on TV, probably to conceal his identity in fear of being persecuted for crimes against humanity. Back to CNN, the same fascinated reporter invites viewers to see footage taken by an Israeli drone. The screen flickers, and then we see an aerial view of Yafa Street in Gaza. The crosshairs zoom in onto the face of a child. Welcome to the Gaza laboratory, where Israel's arms industry tests every new technology before exporting it to the rest of the world, spreading security across the globe, planting walls, mounting surveillance equipment, training riot police on crowd control and disbursement, guarding the privileged from the wrath of the poor and the hunger of the refugees, building detention facilities to warehouse excess humanity. They can help train your officers on how to clamp down on protesters and protect your authority without getting your hands dirty, without getting dust on your shoes, walking those filthy streets with a destitute sleep. So just sit in your air-conditioned unit and suppress and oppress as you please with a click of a button. This is the new sport of the privileged of this world. Rome's Colosseum has moved to Tel Aviv, where the show is being aired live on TV. On a large monitor at the IDF headquarters, trapped in the crosshair of a drone, is 9-year-old Rabi' Qasim Abu Ras. He is running towards an ambulance. Click. His body splits in halves. Each half flies in a different direction. Behind him, his mother stands frozen, confused. Poor Aisha Abu Ras. No mother should have to choose which half of her child to run to, which half of her child to embrace for a final time. Last year, in Palestine alone, hundreds of children like Rabia were killed by drones. But rest assured, they were all killed with cutting-edge technology and with surgical precision.